Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello, and welcome to Prose and Cons, the podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers, where sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. Today I'll be your host, James Healy. I'm joined today by Alex Eldridge.
Hey, my name's Alex. I have written a short story collection. I have been published in a few magazines, including Penthouse Australia and The Big Issue. And of course, I've contributed the story Town Hall Steps to The New Mythic, our short story anthology. Got the word anthology for a second.
And Phoenix Raig.
So I'm the founder of Bent Light Writing. It's an independent freelance editing house with a plethora of editing services and things like that. I do have an agent for one of my children's books. That's a pretty cool achievement. And I also have contributed a story to The New Mythic, and that was nominated for an Ari Ellis Award.
Very cool, very cool. And I'm known for Cooling Engines. I'm a freelance editor, and I enjoy writing science fiction and horror. Not joining us today is Paddy Boylan, Matan, Elul, and Ali Burnham. But they all would have really liked to have been here with us today, because today we are going to be talking about thematic conflict and how to get a bit more out of the theme of your novel or story. Before we jump into the main topic, I just want to ask you lads, what have you been reading and what have you been consuming lately?
I've been reading a compilation from Midnight Echo, which is the magazine that is the brainchild of the Australian Horror Writers Association. And I just finished that off yesterday, and I read this really good story. I can't remember exactly what it was called. I think it was called Fish, but it's about this kid it's set in a small town, Australia, and their family's quite itinerant and they move around a lot, and strange things are sort of going on. Like his dad seems a bit crazy, and it's just a really, really good, juicy plot reveal at the end. It's just, it feels very satisfying, very creepy. Yeah. So that's what I've been reading mainly.
For myself, so one of my clients right now is a small publishing house, so I've been editing for them, and it's just like yeah, there's some work to do with it, but it's just like a good book. So over the last week and a half, I've just been plowing through this like 100k word novel, and it's very good, very like 100 Years of Solitude-esque, which I really dig. And then the other thing I've been watching, I've been really into D&D Let's Plays. It's specifically with Dimension 20. I've been listening to this one by Dimension 20 called Never After. It's so good. I'm so gripped by this story. It's like creepy. It taps into like Brothers Grimm stuff. It's a lot of like fairy tale, all that sort of style of creepy. And I'm into it. Like I have not been this gripped in a story in a long time, and it's very satisfying.
Nice. They've gotten really popular now, the kind of let's watch D&D things.
Oh yeah, I've been into them for a while.
Nice. Just recently I read Several People Are Typing, which is a really, really good kind of comic horror story. Yeah. It's written entirely in text form. It takes place entirely on like
oh cool. Yeah, I get
like a workplace messenger app. And it's a story of a guy who has become disembodied and has entered into the basically workspace messenger app, and he's trying to ask for help, and everyone's like work from home and stuff, and nobody is taking it seriously. And
oh whoa.
Yeah, it's really good. Like it's really quite satirical and quite funny, while being kind of like deeply scary as well. And then a lot of like great themes of how much time do we spend on the internet, and what's reality, and what's IRL, and what's the kind of internet life and stuff like that. Really ambitious, because the whole thing is just text. There's no setting, no interiority, all just text. But it actually works. Like it pulls together really well.
That's basically like a script, really, isn't it? Like
100%
format functionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Except with less direction. You know?
Yeah. So it's surprising that it actually manages to work and manages to have character arcs, a bit of depth to it. Like, so yeah, really, really good.
It's like the modern Dracula with the letters back and forth in the journal entries. It's
100%.
Like text messages.
100%. Yeah. All right. So I'll jump us into our theme. Today we're going to be talking about thematic conflict. So just to give a little explanation of what that is or what that involves. I've only come across this in the last few months myself, and I've kind of come to the realization that this is sort of what we should always be trying to do with our stories. Certainly for myself, I tend to write a story and really focus on the plot, really focus on the character, and then sometime in the drafting, I'll figure out what the theme is, and then I'll sort of basically just point to it. And this makes the theme quite static. It just makes it sort of be something which is sitting there that the characters nod to. Maybe even the characters express in a kind of heavy-handed way at some point in the story. This is okay, serviceable. It works, but it's probably like the least engaging way to use your theme. What you should almost be always trying to do is to set your theme up against an opposing idea, what is basically known as the anti-theme, and then have the two ideas sort of in conflict with one another during the story, so that it's actually unclear what your theme is until later on in your story, when your characters kind of reach their final state, their final decision, kind of come through their character arc, and they've either sided with or sided against the theme. And that's when the message of the story becomes clear. So an example of this would be if you're setting up a story which is about greed, and the message of your story might be that kind of greed gets you what you want. You can tell a pretty compelling story about that, where the plot leaves the character realize this and the character goes through a character arc. But if you take an opposing idea and say generosity will make people like you, you now have two opposing ideas, which is generosity will make people like you, greed will get you what you want. And now you have a bit more of a dynamic vibe throughout the story, because the reader won't know which of these two ideas is going to be the one that's going to essentially win out. And it's something that some readers will connect to one idea and other readers will connect to the other idea. And they won't know which of the, as I said, they won't know which of the ideas will ring out. So you have a lot more drama within your theme and a lot more dynamic story because of this bouncing back and forth. So can I ask you guys, can you think of any stories that you've read or any films that you've watched where kind of two diametrically opposed ideas were sort of in opposition or in debate with one another throughout the story?
Yeah, I was thinking about this for a little bit, and then I came to Princess Mononoke by Hayao Miyazaki. You have the opposition of like progress and modernization and industrialization versus like paying respects to what was and the importance of connection to the land. And he does a very good job of posing both, because he does a very good job at de-villainizing his antagonists. Like all of his characters are very human, and it's like even the main antagonist of that movie, you like her because she's respectful to her people. She's actually very noble, and like her people actually really love her. She's very multidimensional. And so you do start to see like, oh, I mean, their progress, she's helping a lot of people and all these things. And it's kind of just this sad withering away of what was, which is sad. And it's definitely posed as the antagonistic arc. But you do see both sides and they are in conflict. And it's like, oh, I do feel caught in the middle.
I love that. That's a really important aspect of it. When you have the team and the anti-team, both ideas need to be represented kind of equally. Both of them need equal time in the story. And both of them need to be presented as potential good options. So you can't, if you have one of them as the kind of the obvious bad idea and one of them is the obvious good idea, it becomes a little bit one-sided and a little bit obvious which way it will go. Also, like you said, they de-villainize the antagonist. So if you had one idea represented by people who were just reprehensible the whole time through the story, it would just come across as quite obvious where the story was going. So there would still be that conflict, but you would know the whole time which way it was going to work out. How about yourself, Alex?
The first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned this, I guess I'd almost couch it as a meta conflict. Like you've got the characters that might conflict, but this is like an overarching conflict of these two ideas or ideologies. The first thing that came to my head when I thought of that was The Matrix, where you've got this feeling of desire to know truth and see things for how they are as they really exist, conflicting with this other desire to get functionally like play it safe and just exist in this world that maybe isn't completely true, but is, safe and comfortable. And like there's the conflict with Cypher when he sells them out and he's just like, look, I just want to have a big house with a pretty wife and that stuff. I don't care if it's real. And I think that's really tangible concept. I think about that a lot. I'm like, that's actually it's a good point. Would you want to get out of the Matrix or wouldn't you? So I guess it's like freedom versus security in some level. There's a lot of different ways you could play it, but there is that distinctive butting heads of those two ideologies.
Yeah, I like that. One of the benefits of having kind of a thematic conflict within a story is that even after the story is over, the plot is finished and the character has reached their arc, you can be kind of left with a question if it's done right, because you are left with which of those two things what I want, and sometimes you might think one way, sometimes you might think another. So something that having a thematic conflict can do in the story is almost give it a bit more meaning and allow it to resonate better with the audience, because it's not simply, if it's one-sided, you're almost preaching, you're almost telling them this is the correct way. But if you're playing
Yeah, you
back
don't
and
want a
forth,
straw man. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're doing both and you're giving both of them strong arguments and convincing arguments for each side, it leaves the audience with much more questions afterwards and something for them to think about, which is a lot stronger, I think.
It's very true.
Yeah. One thing that you can do, and it does work, is if your character starts with one mindset and that's the anti-theme, and they're told they need to change their mindset, or the plot of the story gives them an alternate route that they can take, and they kind of go through a change. But again, this still feels like that was what they were supposed to do. So it doesn't quite come across as that same kind of opposition. It works that as team and anti-team, but you don't get that same clashing. My favorite example, because I think it works really well throughout the story, is Titanic, and how Titanic has a theme of kind of class and class differences, where we're seeing what the world is like for the characters who are in the upper class, and they're kind of in conversation with the captain and with the staff members. And then we're also seeing what the world is like for the working class and the kind of guys down underneath who are like shoveling the coal. And the story kind of jumps between both of these and kind of shows good examples of being in both communities. And the story kind of plays out for a while. And it's not until we kind of reach the third act of the story the main character kind of makes a decision over which of those two she's going to go with. So yeah, that's essentially the idea behind the theme and anti-theme. So can you guys think of a few examples of stories where ideas were in conflict, but one of them was clearly like the better idea, one of them was clearly the one that was going to come across as the winner, or it was just a bit one-sided?
I'm trying to think.
Or even a story where the theme or the message sort of hits you across the head with what it is.
Oh, the one that I always think about, like it's just because it is so thematically like weighted there, is kind of the like, you guys seen A Bug's Life?
Yeah.
You know how there's like, it's almost anti-authoritarian. There's these grasshoppers that are subjugating all the ants, and the grasshoppers sort of play it off as like, hey, we're sort of protecting you, or where you're, like you would be lost without us. Paternalism versus self-determination is maybe a way you could read that there, but it's pretty obvious. It's like, no, come on, these guys the ants have probably figured it out for themselves. So
yeah, we don't really see examples of them struggling without the grasshoppers, so it seems obvious that they can find without the grasshoppers.
But all we see is them taking all their food and being bullies and scary and stuff. Wow, I'm so glad we talked about A Bug's Life. I love A Bug's Life. That's a fun one to bring up. Actually,
I know
also
it came
underrated.
Before. Yeah, it's a great film.
As a kid, Bug's Life coming out and then Ants coming out, like Ants made me feel so uncomfortable, just because it's like the weirdly gritty version of Ants.
Yes,
I mean, weirdly gritty version of
Christopher Nolan of A Bug's Life.
Yeah, and like Woody Allen is the main character. It's just weird. It's just a strange film.
It's
I really like it though.
Yeah, but anyway, my example would actually be Hamilton, the musical, because you have the theme of Hamilton, who's ambitious and just going for like stand strong in your side and like in what you stand for and go for that, versus Aaron Burr, who's very like, I'm going to wait and see how things play out before I act. Like, so that patience versus just going for it. And you clearly see that, Hamilton's rising through to the top and Aaron Burr is just kind of plateauing. He's stale. He lacks integrity, or like that's what it's pointing to throughout the show. So it's very clear which one you're meant to root for. You're going for Hamilton and stuff. Although, as I'm saying this now, they do it well in the sense that later into the show, that his ambition does start to get him in trouble a little bit. So you do kind of see that he's not pure, just like golden boy straight to the top. So yeah, well done. But yeah, that's the one that came to my mind. Specifically because your first question had the word diametrically opposed in it. And that made me think of the show, which uses they are diametrically opposed foes.
Yeah. My example I think I'm going to use, and it might not be entirely accurate because it's a while since I've seen it, is the first Thor film, because my memory of that, and that has like good theme in it, because he starts off with the attitude of like, I'm the strongest guy out here, so I should be king. And I know his father then turns to him and says like, you need to be more than that. in order to be king, and through the course of the story, he learns to be smarter, or he learns to be a kind of a more dimensional. And then his father's kind of like, oh, maybe you're worthy now. But I guess we never see examples of him having to resort back to being strong is just a really good way of being king. So it feels to me like it's an arc rather than kind of the theme being in conflict as well. He probably has an internal conflict, but he's not in conflict with the theme. That being said, it's been a while since I've seen it, so I might be remembering just the main points of it.
I like that example.
Cheers. I did spend a bit of time thinking about it, so I was like, starting before we go. So that's kind of the idea behind your theme and anti-theme. And as I was saying, if you want to use just the example I was giving was kind of greed getting you what you want and generosity making people like you. That's kind of a fun idea to work with. And then you know that the story of the plot is going to result in the character reaching a conclusion about one of those 2 points. And the character arc is going to result in the character either embracing one of these ideas or kind of failing to embrace. So one of those ideas is going to win. First of all, let's say greed will get you what you want, will win. By the end of the character's arc, they will understand that greed will get you what you want, but they may have rejected or embraced that idea. So using these things as a structure, knowing that your plot is going to lead you to that conclusion, knowing that your character arc is going to lead you to have joined it or not joined it, and if the character's internal want is going to put them more in line with the theme, and then the character's internal flaw is going to put them more in line with the anti-theme. Are they going to go with their flaw, or are they going to go with their internal want? It's going to decide which side of that line they're going to end up on. You kind of end up with an awful lot of structure to your story all of a sudden, where everything is kind of working together. So within that, I think that your plot is kind of going to serve as the catalyst to push your character towards making a decision and to apply more and more pressure towards the character in making that decision.
Yeah. Also, I love. I haven't done much thought on themes specifically. This is really cool, honestly. And I love the idea that you were talking about how the arc leads the character. Like, it's almost like the theme has an arc and the character has an arc, because it doesn't matter if the character actually adopts the theme or rejects the theme. You can have one theme win out, but still have your character arc result in a rejection of that theme, which I think is really cool, because you can play with you can get really dynamic and have some really intense themes win out. Like greed gets you what you want is a pretty bleak theme in the sense, but you can have your character reject that at the end, but still tell a potent story of that rejection and that theme winning out.
Yeah. Jumping off that, what you said about kind of internal conflict, what you want to do in order to kind of better express your theme and anti-theme is to make your character someone in the story who is independent and a little bit undecided about which direction they're going to take. They might be living in one world, whether it's the theme or anti-theme from the beginning of the story, but the event of the story and the event of the plot and their interactions with their characters make them start to question which of the two sides they're going to go with. So like you were saying, the theme is very closely connected to the internal conflict, and then the two ideas are kind of they're pulled from one side or the other. In the example of Titanic, Rose is in the upper class, and her mother and her fiance kind of represent. Her mother I feel to me, is kind of the antagonist who's enforcing her to remain within the upper class, and her fiance, if she chooses to marry him, is kind of like her resigning to stay in that forever. So when she meets Jack represents the middle class and a different way of life. So she finds herself kind of pulled between the two. There's that really fun scene where they all sit down to have dinner, where they actively kind of have a little bit of a debate, but it's not too on the nose, because they're kind of talking about, they're trying to put down Jack as a person, so it works really well. And then from that point on, she kind of jumps from one to the other. She goes to a party in the lower decks, and then when they come back up after the iceberg is hit, she goes back into the upper class, because this is kind of now where the safety is, because they're in danger. And then she goes back to find Jack, and then when she comes back up again, they're evacuating the boats, but the upper class are evacuating. So she gets on the boat and then makes her final decision to go back for Jack. So she's jumping between the two the whole time. And the iceberg hitting the boat is kind of like the catalyst of the plot, which starts to really put pressure and like create what's the phrase? There's a ticking clock essentially for her to make this decision and to figure out what she wants to do. So can you guys think of some examples of stories where a character is pulled between the two ideas?
Yeah, my mind goes to Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 3 specifically, because you see that inner conflict between he's been brought up in the Jedi Order and respects the Jedi ways, but at the same time is butting up against like the Jedi kind of has this weird relationship with love, and it kind of discourages. It's kind of a weird thing because it kind of paints a weird brushstroke on the Jedi Order, because like love is a beautiful thing, and it has this weird relationship of like, no, that's not allowed, and it feels very strict, and so he's not willing to let go of that part of himself. So he's struggling with like, he is good, but it's like the only way for him to embrace that part and fully kind of lean into that is to go to the dark side. So it's like, well, I don't know, both, this kind of sucks, whatever. So then when finally the pressure is put on where Palpatine's about to be killed, and it's like, this is his only access to the power he needs to save his wife, that's his catalyst. It's like, okay, this guy's about to die right now. Like Mace Windu is literally about to kill him. I need to make a split. Like in moments, I'm going to be on one side of this line, and I need to decide which side I'm going to be on. And then in that moment, he makes his decision.
Yeah, I love how Star Wars has that thematic conflict is almost tied into it, because it's the dark side or the light side, and they kind of imply which of them is the wrong one, but it's kind of like up to the character's journey as they get more and more powerful. Which of the two directions are they going to be swayed? And like that, love is something that I'm not sure why the Jedi's dissuaded it, or was it the idea that you can't love one person, you're a Jedi, you should love everyone kind of thing, or what? But obviously love is something that's
passion. I think they discourage passion because the passion is a very Sith thing.
Yeah. So yeah, you can see why that would put it pretty big. It's a big heavy weight going on the side of the Sith side right there. That's cool.
Yeah, they're functionally like monks, right? Like they're just meant to be like very calm and measured, and you know.
Yeah.
The one I would say would be it's a book I talk about all the time on here, Empire Falls by Richard Russo. Basically, there's a guy, he's in a small town, and the story sort of goes on to suggest like the whole town is, the strings are being pulled by this old woman who kind of owns the last like mill in the town, the dying mill town. Like there's not a lot going on, and basically she's kind of holding his purse strings, and it gets to a point where he's like, I'm gonna have to either keep being paid off by this person, and it's going back to that previous theme that I mentioned, like the comfort or the freedom. I'm either going to have to keep getting paid off by this person and like putting up with all the bullshit that goes on in this town, or I'm going to have to break out and go to Martha's Vineyard, which is sort of a metaphor for like a new life sort of thing. So his big thing is like punching his ex-wife's like fiance and then going and rescuing his daughter. Like I think she's in like a school shooting, so he has to go and get her, and then it's the whole thing. But yeah, it's that whole building to that crux of like, what are you going to do? You know, what is your life going to be?
In both of those examples, like I can see the internal conflict for the character, and I would take it that the events of the plot sort of push the character closer towards making that decision. And I suppose evidence of the plot kind of gives weight to each side of the story as it goes on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a good way of like fitting everything together. And that way everything is sort of in conversation with itself, the external conflict, the character's internal conflict, and the kind of idea behind the thematic conflict is all working together. If you can manage to set them all up, you've got, you don't just have the character arc and the plot, you've also got the team developing throughout the story, and that makes it very dynamic. For the readers and for the audience, again, they're not going to know which way the story is going to go, where's the character arc going to go, where's the plot going to go, which of these two ideas is going to be represented as the true idea. And as the writer of the story, you really want to hide which of the two ideas you agree with. It'll work best if they walk away not sure which of the two ideas you were saying is the best one. And that means that you've really given both ideas like equal weight and equal argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the strongest ways of doing this, I think it's the best way of doing this, is through the character interactions with like all of the other characters in the story. If you can think of breaking down these ideas as there's a line dividing all of your other characters, and they're all either on the side of the theme or the side of the anti-theme, that they represent it or they believe in it in some way, and that your main character is kind of independent. Maybe a toe in one side or the other, but they're essentially independent. Michael Wells Schock, an editor with creative screenwriting, used the analogy of angels and demons and said that the team should be represented by angels and the anti-team represented by demons, and they're trying to sway the protagonist from one side or the other. but they can't interact with the protagonist directly. So what they've done is they've possessed all of the other characters, and they're trying to use them to pull the character one way or the other. So all of the characters' interactions throughout the story give them reasons for leaning this way or leaning that way. The antagonist will probably represent the anti-team. The friends might represent the theme. So that way the characters continuously pulled in all their interactions, and the plot is pushing them to make one decision or the other. So can you guys think of some examples of stories where the character is being pulled one way or the other by the characters around them, their friends, or even the antagonist?
Yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean, you have Jack Sparrow, and then you have Will, and Will's kind of walking that straight and narrow, but is slowly being pulled into like more of his pirate roots, his pirate heritage. And Jack Sparrow's kind of this force, this chaotic force that comes in that just kind of negates everything he says, and it's just like, your old bootstrap son. Jack Sparrow's constantly kind of just like, all right, yeah, fine, you walk the straight and narrow, but come with me, essentially. Like, all right, you can say that, but we're going this way. And like he just kind of keeps following and keeps scratching this itch until he's basically fully submerged in his pirate life again.
I like that as well. Jack Sparrow is an iconic character, so he is a great promotion for the pirate life. But he also represents a lot of things that Will would not like. So
exactly. He's like hard to look at. He's a very hard to look at truth for Will. It's cool. He's a very hard reflection to be like, well, I don't want to be a pirate because you're disgusting also.
Yeah.
I'd say mine, I'm reading a book right now called Barracuda by Krista Salkis, who's like an Australian writer. And basically there's a lot of stuff it's mainly about class. Basically there's this two worlds dynamic of like the world he comes from, which is this lower class, like blue collar. I mean, his dad's a truck driver, his mother's a hairdresser, and he's on this like full ride scholarship to like a really prestigious private school, which is, for swimming, because he's a really good swimmer. And the whole time there's just he starts off like just really hating this private school and being like, this sucks. He calls it like C words college. That's the terminology he gives it. Except he doesn't say
it's
C-word.
Australia.
Yeah, exactly. It's
different relationship with the word.
So basically there's this internal conflict for the whole first half of the book where he's like, eventually he makes friends with like people in the school and they sort of accept him, and then he's just pulled these two ways, and like you see him with his father, and like the guy's just talking, they're talking together, and the dad's like, oh, I'm not going to take you to swimming practice because that represents, you trying to be above your station. And then he goes to like a friend's house and they're like really rich stuff, and you can see like again, sort of like the previous story that said this matriarch is like pulling the strings of like all this whole family, and they're all like very uptight and very like, oh, like don't knock over the tea kettle sort of thing, like don't piss off mom. And so you just see this class divide sort of thing, and it's pretty well represented for both sides, but each of the characters basically represent both sides of that coin, and he's sort of pulled either side. And eventually he doesn't make a choice in the end. Eventually the choice is sort of made for him. But yeah.
Okay. Then that works really well. And then of course in Titanic, Jack works, like we kind of all fall in love with Jack because he's got such a Leonardo DiCaprio.
How can you not?
Yeah, right. And then his lifestyle is so free and wonderful. He just makes a great representation for that side of things. But then the pressure from the fiance and from the mother, like even though they're not nice, they keep pressuring and pulling Rose back in the other direction, and then kind of the events of the story play into that as well. Excellent. So that's kind of the four main elements of that. It's not necessarily something that you have to do in a story. It's just something that, like, I feel like if you're not trying to do that with your team, you're really underutilizing what it can be. If you just come up with a theme and anti-theme alone, that will make your story, or make your theme twice as dynamic if you can represent the anti-theme at some point in the story. If you can connect the theme and anti-theme to your characters' inner conflicts, where the characters want is leading them towards the theme, and your character's flaw is leading them away from the theme towards the anti-theme. Again, that's all going to have everything just flow tighter and feel like it's a lot more resonant. If the events of the plot are pushing your character towards reaching this decision and giving this character evidence of one and then evidence of the other so that they remain conflicted, it'll maintain a sense of dynamic conflict as the events of the story flow and the pacing picks up. And then if you can divide all of your characters on either side of a line, have half of them represent the team and half of them represent the anti-team, that's a really good way of figuring out what characters to have in your story and what way to use those characters and have your main character pulled one way or the other consistently throughout the story. Each of those individual elements can be really helpful for structuring a story or for just adding an extra element to the story. If you can manage to put them all in together, you're going to have a really dynamic play of ideas within your team, as well as having everything else work. So it's well worth trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying those ideas have to be very strong as well. Like I feel like they have to be very very resonant, basic core themes like justice and mercy, or like freedom versus security, or they're these big like push-pull dynamic sort of things to make that argument really compelling either way. You have to be basing it on themes that are legitimate. You can't just be like, oh, whether to be fashionable or whether to like just do your own thing. Like, I mean, I guess you could make something of that, but like they have to be very sturdy pillars that you have to they're built behind, because you're stringing tension along that. Essentially, you're making sure that the push and pull is coming from a legitimate place. So I think that's difficult to shoehorn into a story. I feel like a story will tell you if it's coming from that place. I mean, everything will have a theme. There'll be a theme that runs through it, but to necessarily get that conflicting thing, not necessarily every story will have it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you have to put in every story, but any story that has a theme will just have its opposite. And if you're thinking about your team and your anti-team and you feel like they are weak, it might almost be stronger to find a different team, or to maybe look at the team from a different angle, just because it would probably make a stronger story. But then again, every story is different, and there might be something that you really want to tell in your plot. There might be a really important character arc that you're trying to get across. But for me, I'm definitely thinking that if you're kind of just going with a theme, you're underutilizing a big pillar of your story.
It's a great like tool when you're writing your story it's just another lens to look at what you're writing to see if you can pull more out of it, is kind of how I feel it, where it's like I know for me, a lot of my stories come from, I usually get like Paddy has talked about this as well. I usually think about an idea first. It's not like I think about a character or like a theme first or anything like that. Usually an idea comes to mind and I start with that. That's my seed. But from there, I can then kind of ask myself, it's like, all right, within these ideas, what themes do I see surfacing? Early on, I can start asking that. And then it becomes this other dimension I can look at the story through. And then it starts to paint the characters like the characters start to develop more. Everything becomes a little bit more profound and a little bit more multidimensional by just kind of, I don't know. It's kind of like, as readers, we're going to pull, whether or not you intend the themes, readers are going to pull themes out of your story anyway. And they might not even be the themes that you plant in there. So it's like, in reality, you're kind of just doing the same exercise the reader is doing ahead of time. So it's like, the reader might find different themes than the ones you're kind of indicating, but at the very least, you're writing for a reader. You're writing from a reading place of exploring your world through themes, because that's how we explore worlds. We find themes. So it's like, it's a good exercise to bring that in with you while you're doing your writing. And I do agree with what Alex said, where they do need to start with very core pillaring themes. And then it's kind of like what you said with the demons and angels. Those are your like pillars on either side, but then those kind of dilute and shift and change based on what character is exploring them at a given point. So it's like, you might take The Devil Wears Prada, where you do think about someone being fashionable or something like this, but obviously it's like, it's not just about being fashionable. The actual core themes behind it are more, she's exploring it because she wants to feel viable in the world. And it's really like, wanting to be accepted versus losing yourself. Like, it is very core, because those are the things we look for in our own humanity, I guess. So it's just like, build it on something very, very simple and very close to home. But that doesn't mean it needs to be a very black and white, dull, simple story. It's just like, at the end of the day, those are the themes we dilute down to usually. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I've definitely found myself doing the same thing. with kind of feeling like when I start writing a story, it kind of starts as a little inkling. So I kind of noticed I've been using the same setting a few times recently.
Yeah.
I stopped and asked myself, what does that setting represent? And the different things the characters can do in that setting, what does that represent? And I was like, there's my team and anti-team right there. And then I've structured the characters and I've structured the plot around that. And it all feels so much tighter as a result of doing it.
It's like self-discovery, because it is like, for instance, I gravitate towards like deep space themes, especially if I'm writing something tense or a bit more horror leaning. I tend to go into the darkness of space a bit. It's something that fascinates me. I just love it as a setting. And it's just a little like self-exploration, because it's like the themes are there. You just kind of have to ask yourself, why am I putting the story here? What does this setting represent to me? And then you start to find your own themes by just kind of exploring your own psyche of like, why do I like deep space? What does this represent to me? And it's isolation. It's whatever it is, darkness, deprivation. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, James recently came up with a novel concept for how we can put together our next volume stuff. And one of the options that we had there, we had like ideas, characters, I think it was scenarios and themes. And it really made me think about, well, what is the difference between an idea and a theme? And, how does character play into that? And you really have to sort of break it down and interrogate what something is. And kind of what I got out of it was like a theme is like an overarching, it's less tangible and it's more related to the moral architecture of the story, if that doesn't sound too pretentious. It's something that informs the values of the characters rather than necessarily the action itself. It's kind of how the characters interact with the setting, which is really powerful, if not a little bit abstracted,
Yeah.
And yes, we are developing concepts at the moment for our second book. And
Spoiler.
Some of the stuff that's coming up is really exciting. Really
pretty fun. Yeah, I added a bunch.
Yeah.
Like just the last 5. I just mine. I was just like.
Yeah, I'm looking forward for the bloodletting that will be the voting, the rounds of voting, which is always pretty ruthless and horrific. But it's gonna be fun. We'll all stay friends. We'll all stay friends.
We'll make it.
It's the crucible. Getting through that is what. We renew our license as a group.
Yeah. It's the
that's it, isn't it? It's like, okay, cool. You live to fight another day. Precipice fiction.
Yeah. It's the foundation. It's the foundation of teamwork. It's the kind of what's the phrase?
Teamwork makes the team work.
No, that wasn't going to be my phrase, but yeah, that one too.
Can we start just introducing the pod with that from now on? Teamwork makes the teamwork.
It's as we always say here at Precipice Fiction, and have always said it. We've always said this. Teamwork.
We've always said it every episode previous to this one.
If you haven't noticed,
teamwork makes the team.
If you haven't noticed, go back and listen to all of them. See if you can find it.
Yeah, and if teamwork doesn't work, a clearly delineated set of rules based on the voting and democracy, we'll make sure we all stay in our lanes.
Yes.
All right, cool. I think that about wraps us up. I have a quick quote here from Leo Tolstoy on a thematic conflict, just to finish us out. The story leaves a deeper impression when it is impossible to tell which side the author is on. So
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
And so true.
Yeah, he had a few bangers. Thank you very much, listeners, for sticking with us. We have been Pros and Cons by Precipice Fiction. We would really, really love if you could leave us a review on Spotify or YouTube or whatever podcasting app or website you chose to listen to us on. It really, really helps us with the algorithm.
And as we've mentioned a couple times, the New Mythic is our anthology currently out there, twice nominated, cool stuff. That's available on Amazon. You could buy a copy now. Paperback is there. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Ebook is there as well for significantly cheaper if you don't care for the physical thing. And then we do have an audiobook coming. Date yet to be announced, but it is pending very shortly. And this thing is just like Tolstoy. It's a banger.
Just like Tolstoy.
Just like Tolstoy used to say, teamwork makes the team work.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.